The night was too quiet. A storm gathered at the edges of the horizon, pressing the air heavy and still, as if the world itself held its breath. Inside the small house, a baby stirred in his crib, soft whimpers breaking the silence. Shadows stretched long across the floor, and somewhere beyond those walls, danger moved closer. At the crib's side, a dog lay awake. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, ears twitching with every sound, eyes sharp even in the darkness. This wasn't just duty, this was love. Raw, unspoken, unbreakable. The baby's tiny hand had once curled around his fur, anchoring him to life in ways he could never forget. Tonight, that bond would be tested. The baby whimpered again, and the dog rose, muscles taut. His instincts screamed. Something was coming, something that could shatter everything. The storm outside cracked, thunder rumbling like a warning, and as lightning lit the room for an instant, the dog pressed closer to the crib, protector, lifeline, and shield. Tonight, their journey would begin. The morning sun filtered through the gauzy curtains, spilling gold across the nursery floor. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, caught in the soft light, moving as though time itself had slowed to watch the two souls within the room. The baby's small chest rose and fell, his breathing steady, though every now and then his lips puckered in a dream, murmuring sounds that no one but his closest companion could hear. On the rug by the crib, the dog lay stretched out, his fur a mix of chestnut and cream, patched like autumn leaves pressed together by time. His ears flicked at the faintest sound, a bird outside, a passing car, the creak of the house as it settled into itself. But his eyes never left the crib. The world outside might have demanded attention, but here in this sanctuary, his only purpose was watching, waiting, guarding. The baby shifted, fingers curling into a soft fist. Without a word, without a cry, the dog rose, stepping softly across the wooden floor until he reached the crib's side. He pressed his nose between the wooden slats, close enough to feel the warmth of the baby's tiny hand brushing against his fur. The baby sighed, releasing that fist, and in that simple gesture, a touch as light as a feather, peace washed through the room again. It was not a bond born of convenience. It was something deeper, something older than either of them could explain. The dog remembered the first moment he had been placed near the infant, his instinct taut with questions. Would the baby cry? Would he be pushed away? But no, the child had reached out, eyes wide, lips curved in something like wonder. His fingers had tangled clumsily in the dog's fur, and in that moment, an invisible thread tied them together. Protector and protected, giver and receiver of unconditional love. Days had blurred into weeks, weeks into months, and always the two had remained close. When the baby giggled, the sound was incomplete, until it echoed against the walls and was matched by the dog's tail thumping the floor. When the baby cried, the dog would pace anxiously, nudging the parents, pressing his body against the crib, as though his weight alone could shield the child from sorrow. There was a language here that no one else could speak, a language of glances, of breaths, of movements that were too small for anyone but them to notice. Outside, the world was chaotic, loud, indifferent. But in this room, in this home, there was peace. The house was alive with the gentle rhythms of morning. A kettle whistled faintly in the kitchen. A chair creaked as someone shifted their weight. But in the nursery, a softer world existed, one that belonged only to a baby and his dog. The crib's mobile turned slowly, catching a ray of sun and scattering small rainbows across the pale walls. The baby gurgled at the shifting colors, tiny arms batting clumsily at the air. His laugh, that bubbling, fragile sound, carried through the room. The dog's ears perked instantly. He lifted his head, eyes warm and alert, before rising to stand on his forepaws and sniff the air near the crib, as though checking to see what had brought his little human such joy. The baby's eyes, wide and bright, tracked him. A squeal burst from his lips, and in that sound, the dog heard everything he needed to know. Approval, affection, a calling that went deeper than words. He padded to the crib's side again, resting his chin gently on the frame. The baby reached out, fingers grasping toward him. Their fingertips brushed against the dog's fur, catching on the strands, pulling clumsily but with purpose. The dog didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned in closer, as though offering more of himself, as though saying, "Here I am, all of me, yours to hold." Moments like these had become ritual. In the quiet space between feeding and naps, between chores and chaos, they found each other. The dog never demanded. He simply waited. The baby, still too small to form words, had no language but touch and sound. Yet somehow, they understood one another better than most adults could hope to understand anyone. Later that morning, as sunlight spread across the living room, the baby was set down on a blanket. The wooden floor creaked beneath him, but his eyes stayed fixed on the dog padding into view. The dog lowered himself onto his belly, nose pressing against the baby's outstretched feet. The baby kicked, squealing with delight. A game had begun. Kick, sniff, kick, sniff. Each movement met with patience. Each squeal answered with stillness, as though the dog knew his role wasn't to win, but to encourage, to make the baby feel powerful in a world where everything else was so much bigger, so much louder. And so the day unfolded. When the baby drifted into slumber on the blanket, the dog circled twice before curling close by, his body forming a barrier against the draft slipping under the door. When the baby awoke with startled cries, the dog's head shot up first, muscles tense, ears swiveling toward the sound, as if the world had just given him a mission. Find out what is wrong, make it right. The parents sometimes laughed, watching It's like he thinks he's the baby's shadow, they'd say. They weren't wrong. The dog was a shadow, but he was more than. He was the sentinel who never left his post, the friend who asked nothing in return but presence, the silent witness to every first smile, every restless night, every new discovery of small hands and feet. Evening arrived slowly, the light softening into amber. Dinner scents drifted from the kitchen, warm and inviting. The baby, bathed and drowsy, was nestled once more into his crib. The dog settled beside him, but tonight something shifted. Instead of lying down straight away, he sat, eyes fixed on the window. The wind picked up outside, rattling the branches against the glass. His body went taut, muscles trembling with instinct. The baby stirred, a whimper slipping free. The dog turned immediately, gaze softening. He lowered himself, pressing nose to the crib's edge, a silent vow in the darkness. You are safe. As long as I am here, you are safe. The whimper faded. The baby sighed, drifting back into sleep. The dog stayed awake long after, listening to the sounds of the house, the whispers of the world outside. He did not relax until the baby's breathing deepened into steady rhythm. And in that simple night ritual of watchfulness, of patience, of love without words, the bond between them thickened, invisible threads weaving tighter. It was the kind of bond that would soon be tested. The next morning came with rain, not the thunderous kind that shakes walls and rattles nerves, but a soft drizzle that clung to the windows like misty fingerprints. The house was dim, quiet. The baby lay on his back, kicking at the air, his gaze fixed on the dog who sat just a few feet away. The dog shifted his weight, tail sweeping lazily against the floor. He lifted his paw, almost hesitant, and pressed it gently against the blanket, a gesture so small it could have been mistaken for coincidence. But the baby responded instantly, squealing with delight, arms flapping as though to say, yes, yes, you're here, don't stop. A smile curved across the baby's face, that uneven, toothless grin that only belonged to him, and the dog leaned in closer, sniffing at the small socks patterned with faded stars. The baby's hand shot out, clumsy but determined, and latched onto his ear. The tug should have hurt, but the dog simply held still, eyes closing, accepting. His patience was endless. Time inched forward. The mother moved about in the background, folding laundry, humming soft. She glanced over once, twice, watching the two, her lips curving into a smile that was half awe, half gratitude. For in that room she saw something she could never orchestrate or demand. She saw trust. She saw love, unforced and unbreakable. By mid-afternoon, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a world that smelled of wet earth and green leaves. The baby was bundled into a stroller for a short walk. The dog trotted beside them, tethered by leash, but not by spirit. He pulled forward only once, when a loud truck passed, his head turning sharply toward the sound. His body angled, protective, until the noise faded. Then he fell back into step, eyes always flicking toward the stroller, always checking, always guarding. They passed neighbors who waved, some chuckling. That's not a dog, one man joked. That's a soldier. The comment lingered, not because it was funny, but because it rang with truth. The dog was more than a companion. He was a sentinel in fur, his loyalty sharpened to a blade. When they returned home, the baby was lifted out, cheeks flushed from the cool air. The dog pressed close, sniffing, ensuring all was well. The baby, though drowsy, reached instinctively toward him. His small fingers brushed fur, and even in near sleep, his lips curled into that same trusting smile. Evenings in the house often felt like small sanctuaries. The baby's father would sit with a book, the mother with her tea, but their eyes always softened when they looked toward the right. There, the baby lay surrounded by toys he scarcely touched, his attention fixed entirely on the dog. Wooden blocks toppled unnoticed. A rattle rolled to the corner. What mattered was the soft, steady rise and fall of the dog's chest beside him. Sometimes the dog would rest his paw lightly across the baby's stomach, never heavy enough to harm, but firm enough to feel like an anchor. The baby's breathing slowed under that weight, a rhythm syncing with the dog's, until both seemed woven into the same song. It was not lost on the parents that their child slept best when the dog was near. On nights when fear or hunger woke him, when cries pierced the stillness, it was often not the lullaby or rocking chair that soothed him first. It was the dog padding quietly to the crib, resting his head along the frame. The baby's tears would soften into whimpers, then sighs, then silence. And so, bit by bit, trust became habit, and habit became bond. But bonds like these are not only built in comfort, they are tested in moments unseen. One night, the baby woke restless, his cries sharp and insistent. The father lifted him, pacing the floor, whispering soothing words. Yet the crying continued, shrill and unrelenting. The dog rose from his corner, tail low, ears pinned forward. He followed, steps measured, gaze unblinking. When the father finally set the baby back down, frustration etched across his tired features. It was the dog who pressed forward. He sniffed once, twice, then pawed at the blanket. The mother frowned, watching. "What is it, boy?" she murmured. The dog whined, a soft, anxious sound. He nosed again at the blanket, pushing it back. And there it was, a small fold of fabric pressed tight against the baby's mouth, nearly covering his nose. The mother gasped, snatching it away. The crying softened immediately, melting into a hiccuping sigh. Relief flooded the room like a second sunrise. The parents looked at one another, shaken but grateful. Their eyes fell on the dog, whose gaze never left the baby. He didn't understand gratitude, at least not in words, but he understood relief. He understood that his little human could breathe again. That was enough. That night, when the house finally settled, the parents whispered softly about what had happened, about the way he had known. And the truth was undeniable. There was something in the bond between them that went deeper than instinct, deeper than chance. The baby slept soundly, his tiny hand curled around a patch of fur that had slipped between the crib slats. And the dog, eyes half-lidded, kept watch. He always kept watch. The days continued their quiet rhythm, strung together like beads on a necklace. Each day seemed the same from the outside. The baby's naps, the dog's watchful presence, the parents' soft laughter, filling the... Yet for those two souls at the center, each moment carved itself into memory, shaping something invisible but unshakable. On warm afternoons, when sunlight streamed across the living room floor, the baby was placed in his playpen, surrounded by a fortress of pillows. The dog would circle once before settling, right at the opening, as though he were a sentry guarding the gates of a castle. No toy captured the baby's attention as completely as his guardian did. Wooden animals, plush bears and rattles, were all ignored in favor of the soft, rhythmic sound of breathing beside him. Sometimes, when the baby laughed, a high, bubbling sound that seemed too big for his small frame, the dog would tilt his head, ears flicking in curiosity. The laugh always pulled something out of him too, a gentle wag of the tail, a low rumble in his chest that wasn't quite a growl but wasn't silence either. It was as though they shared an inside joke that no one else could hear. At night, when the world outside dimmed and the house grew still, the baby often stirred just before midnight. He would make no sound, only shifting restlessly in his crib. But the dog always noticed. His eyes would open, glowing faintly in the dark, and he padded silently to the crib, pressed his nose through the wooden slats, and breathed in the baby's familiar scent. Almost always, the baby would settle again within seconds. The dog would linger there, waiting until the tiny chest rose and fell in steady rhythm once more. There was no praise for this. No one clapped or rewarded him. Yet he did it, night after night, because love, in its truest form, does not wait for recognition. One evening, the family gathered in the backyard. The air was cool, filled with the hum of crickets and the faint smell of cut grass. The baby was nestled on a blanket spread across the lawn, his wide eyes reflecting the stars that blinked into view one by one. The dog lay beside him, stretched long, his body warm against the chill creeping into the air. The baby reached out, hand brushing clumsily against the dog's side, his tiny fingers tangled in fur. The dog shifted slightly, not to pull away but to press closer. The baby cooed, a sound so pure it carried across the yard like a prayer. The parents sat a few feet away, sipping tea, watching the scene unfold. They exchanged a glance heavy with unspoken gratitude, for in that quiet tableau, under a sky sprinkled with stars, they saw something sacred, a love that needed no words, no explanation. The night deepened, and eventually the baby grew drowsy. His lids fluttered, his breath slow, but even as sleep tugged at him, his grip on the dog's fur remained, small fingers refusing to let go. The dog stayed perfectly still, as though carved from stone, not daring to disturb the fragile trust wrapped around them both. Hours later, when the family retreated inside and the house fell silent again, the dog lingered awake. He lay near the crib, his ears attuned to every sound. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling faintly through the cracks in the windows. Branches scraped softly against the side. To the world, these sounds were meaningless, but to him they were signals, things to track, to catalog, to guard against. The baby shifted, sighing in his sleep, and the dog immediately turned his head. His gaze softened at the sight of his small companion, safe and dreaming. He lay back down, head resting on his paws, but his eyes stayed open, for all was well tonight. But somewhere deep within, some quiet part of him knew, peace was not permanent. Peace was only the pause before the world asked for more, and when it did, he would be ready. The storm announced itself quietly at first, a distant rumble rolling across the sky, a flicker of light behind the clouds. The parents exchanged glances but said nothing. Storms were common here, and the night seemed otherwise calm. Inside the nursery, the baby stirred in his crib, his small fingers tightening on the blanket. The dog lifted his head before the thunder reached them, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. He stood slowly, padding to the window. Rain had not yet fallen, but the air was heavy, charged with something invisible. The second rumble came louder, closer. This time the baby whimpered, his lip trembling in sleep. The dog turned instantly, pressing his nose between the crib's slats, releasing a soft huff as if to say, "I'm here. Don't be afraid." But the storm was not the only thing moving in the dark. Far down the street, lights flickered out as power lines shivered in the wind. A transformer popped, sending sparks into the night. Houses blinked into blackness. The family's living room lamp buzzed, then dimmed, plunging the home into a sudden hush broken only by the baby's cry. The parents rushed in, soothing words on their lips, fumbling for flashlights, but the dog didn't move toward them. His gaze was locked on the window, his body stiffened, hackles rising. For beyond the storm's noise, he heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to be mistaken for rain. The baby's cries grew louder, sharper, cutting through the air. The dog growled low in his throat, a sound so rare that it startled even him. Another clap of thunder. Another flicker of lightning. And in that white flash, just for a second, a shadow shifted across the yard. Human, moving toward the house. The dog lunged to the window, barking, a sound that shook the walls. The parents froze, startled, then looked where his gaze burned. Their faces pale, the father pulled the curtains shut, muttering, "Probably just someone passing." But his voice was strained, unconvincing. The dog didn't believe it. He didn't trust the quiet tone, the forced calm. His instincts screamed louder than thunder. Danger is here. Danger is near. The baby. The storm pressed harder against the house. Wind howled through the eaves, rattling loose shingles. The baby wailed louder, tiny fists flailing. The mother scooped him up, pressing him to her chest. The dog paced in front of them, muscles taut, eyes locked on the door. And then, a sound no storm could explain. The metallic click of the gate outside. Slow, purposeful. The dog froze, then growled again, louder this time. He positioned himself between the crib and the door, tail straight, body braced. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the window once more. A figure stood at the gate, hand gripping the latch. The father grabbed his phone, fingers shaking, but the service was already gone. The storm had killed the signal. The mother clutched the baby tighter, rocking him, whispering prayers. And in that moment, the dog's role became clear. He was not just a shadow anymore. He was the wall between love and loss. The latch lifted. The gate creaked. The dog bared his teeth. The gate creaked open, a sound swallowed almost immediately by the roar of thunder. The father's eyes darted to the window, his hand gripping the useless phone, as though it could still save them. The mother held the baby close, rocking him, her heartbeat hammering so loudly she could almost hear it echo in her ears. But the dog moved differently. He lowered his body, his muscles coiling like springs. Every hair along his spine stood on end, his lips pulled back, teeth bared in a snarl that vibrated through the floorboards. His entire being focused on the single truth. His instincts screamed. Someone was coming close. The baby's cries faltered, hiccuping into soft whimpers, as he buried his face against his mother's shoulder. Yet even in fear, he turned his head just enough to glimpse the dog. Wide, wet eyes fixed on the sentinel before him. Something passed between them. Not understanding, not words, but recognition. The baby felt the tension, the protection, and his sobs softened into small, broken sounds. The parents whispered hurriedly, arguing in hushed tones. Should they hide? Should they flee? Should they confront? But the storm outside silenced every option. The roads were flooding already, the wind tearing through branches. They were trapped, the world shrinking to this small, trembling house. The sound of boots on gravel cut through the night, slow, deliberate, nearer. The dog lunged forward, barking with a ferocity no one had ever heard from him before. His voice filled the house, deep and raw, echoing off every wall. It was not the bark of curiosity. It was a warning, a command. Do not take another step. For a moment, the footsteps stopped. Silent. The storm howled. The rain began to pelt the windows in sheets. And then, another sound. A hand jiggling the back door handle. Testing. The father cursed under his breath. The mother clutched the baby tighter, tears streaking her cheeks. But the dog did not waver. He positioned himself directly in front of the door, body rigid, eyes burning. His growl deepened, rolling through his chest like distant thunder. His tail was straight, unyielding. If the door opened, he would be the first, the only barrier. Another rattle of the handle, harder this time. A metallic clang as though someone had thrown their shoulder against the door. The frame shuddered. The baby let out a high, frightened wail, and still the dog stood firm. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the intruder through the glass pane. A face obscured, shadowed, rain-slick, pressed close for only an instant. But it was enough. The father's heart stopped. The mother gasped, and the dog lunged, slamming his body against the door with a snarl so primal, it made the baby's cries stutter into silence. The intruder recoiled. Another boom of thunder, another pause. For a heartbeat, it seemed the warning had been enough. But then came the scrape of metal, the faint but unmistakable sound of tools against the lock. The father grabbed a chair, wedging it under the handle. His hands Stay back, he whispered, voice cracking. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to his wife, to the dog, or to himself. The baby whimpered again, his tiny hand clutching at his mother's hair. She pressed a trembling kiss to his forehead. The dog did not look away from the door. His chest heaved, each breath deliberate. His world had narrowed to this point, this moment. He didn't need to understand locks or storms. He understood only this: the baby must not be harmed. The scrape continued, harsher, louder, until the sound of wood splintering joined. The parents gasped, clutching each other. The baby cried louder, tears streaking his cheeks. And the dog, every muscle taut, prepared himself. He knew nothing of consequences, of what lay beyond. He knew only love, raw and fierce. Love that would drive him through fire, through storm, through flesh and bone if he must. The door rattled once more, hinges screamed, and then, with a final crash, the lock gave way. The storm's wind howled through the opening, carrying rain and the scent of danger into the house. A dark figure stepped inside. The baby shrieked, the mother screamed, the father staggered back. The intruder stumbled into the room with the storm at his back. His figure was drenched, shadows dripping off him like ink. The flash of lightning behind him carved his silhouette sharp against the doorway. Broad shoulders, heavy boots, gloved hands. His breath came in harsh bursts, visible in the cold night air that now poured inside. The dog's bark exploded again, louder than thunder, a sound that reverberated through the house. He lunged forward, his paws skidding across the wooden floor, his body colliding with the intruder's legs. The man cursed, staggering back into the threshold. His boots swung out instinctively, connecting with the dog's side. The blow knocked him against the doorframe, but he rose instantly, teeth bared, lips curling back into a snarl so deep it shook the intruder's composure. The baby's cries rose higher, piercing and frantic, each sob hitting the air like shattered glass. The mother rocked him desperately, whispering his name, but her own voice was trembling too hard to soothe. The father shouted, "Get out," his voice cracking, more plea than command, but the storm drowned his words. The intruder stepped forward again, rain dripping from his jacket. His eyes darted toward the mother clutching the baby, toward the father fumbling for something, anything to defend them. But the dog moved first. He leapt, jaws snapping inches from the man's arm. The intruder jerked back, narrowly avoiding the bite, but the dog's teeth grazed the fabric of his sleeve, tearing it open. A growl rumbled low in the dog's chest, primal and unyielding. The man cursed again, swinging the heavy tool he carried, a crowbar, slick with rain. The metal whistled through the air, striking the ground inches from the dog's head. Sparks of wood splintered upward. The baby screamed louder, a sound so raw it cut through even the storm. The dog darted sideways, narrowly avoiding the next swing. He barked again, sharp and relentless, every sound a wall between the intruder and the baby. His body moved not with hesitation, but with clarity. There was no room for fear, only instinct, only love. The father lunged forward with the chair he had wedged against the door, swinging wildly. It collided with the intruder's shoulder, the crack echoing through the house. The man grunted, staggering sideways, but his eyes burned with frustration. He shoved the chair aside and advanced again. The mother's sobs grew louder, her arms tightening around the baby. The infant's small hand clutched at her shirt, his cries trembling into hiccups, his wide eyes locked, not on the intruder, but on the dog, as if even through fear, some part of him understood. This was his lifeline, his shield. The dog leapt again, this time colliding full force with the intruder's chest. The impact sent them both stumbling backward into the doorway. Rain lashed against them, thunder cracking overhead. The intruder shoved hard, sending the dog tumbling across the floor. He slid into the wall with a yelp, his body crumpling for a moment. "No," the mother cried out instinctively, her voice breaking. The baby wailed, reaching toward the crumpled form of his protector. But the dog wasn't finished. With a growl he pushed himself back up, shaking his head, vision sharpening again on the figure looming inside the home. His body ached, his breath came ragged, but his stance was steady. He moved back between the crib and the intruder, lowering himself once more, ready to strike. The intruder cursed under his breath. For the first time uncertainty flickered across his face. He looked at the snarling animal, at the wild eyes locked on him, at the parents clinging to each other and the child. And for the briefest second, the storm seemed to pause, as if the night itself were holding its breath. Then the intruder lifted the crowbar again. The dog launched forward, the crowbar arced downward, slicing through the air with deadly weight. The dog lunged upward to meet it, jaws snapping shut around the man's arm. Before the metal could strike, the intruder shouted in pain, stumbling back, the crowbar clattering against the doorframe. The storm's wind carried the sound away, but inside the house, the moment rang like a bell. The dog's teeth sank deeper, a low growl vibrating through his chest. The man yanked, twisting violently, trying to shake him off, but the dog held firm, his body straining, paws skidding against the wet floor. His eyes burned with something raw, a fury not born of hate, but of love, the kind of love that would never let go. The baby shrieked, the sound trembling into sobs. His tiny fists clutched at his mother's shirt, as she backed farther into the room. "Please, please, stop," she cried, though it wasn't clear if she begged the man or the storm itself. The father rushed forward, seizing the fallen crowbar. His grip was clumsy, untrained, but desperation gave him strength. He swung, the metal colliding with the intruder's shoulder. The man roared, jerking sideways, and the dog was thrown free, rolling across the floor. Pain shot through the animal's side, but he staggered up, hackles raised, teeth bared once more. Blood flecked his muzzle, his chest heaved, but his stance was unbroken. The intruder glared at him, clutching his torn arm, his breath ragged. "You stupid mutt," he spat, his voice hoarse. The words meant nothing to the dog. Words were empty. What mattered was the baby's cries behind him, the warmth of that tiny life he had sworn to protect. His ears twitched at every whimper, his body tightening like a bowstring. The intruder lunged again, reaching toward the mother and child. The dog moved faster. He launched himself at the man's legs, jaws clamping down on flesh and fabric. The intruder stumbled, crashing against the dining table. A vase shattered, water spilling across the floor, mixing with blood and rain. The baby's cries rose higher, piercing through the chaos, like sirens. The dog's grip tightened, his body pulling with all his weight. The intruder kicked wildly, his boots slamming into the dog's ribs once, twice. The blows echoed through the room, heavy and brutal. The mother screamed. The father swung again, with the crowbar, narrowly missing the man's head. The dog yelped with each hit, but refused to let go. Pain radiated through him, hot and sharp, but the thought of releasing, of letting the danger move closer to the baby, was unthinkable. He held on, his growl turning into a ragged snarl, his whole body trembling with the effort. Finally, with a desperate shove, the intruder wrenched free. He staggered backward, clutching his bleeding leg, face twisted in rage, and the dog collapsed to his side for only a heartbeat, chest heaving, before forcing himself up again. His stance wavered, but his eyes never left the enemy. The father seized the moment, brandishing the crowbar. His voice cracked, but there was steel in it now. "Get out." The storm howled in answer. Lightning flashed, illuminating the intruder's face, pale, furious, uncertain. His gaze darted from the parents, to the crowbar, to the dog whose bloodied muzzle still bared teeth, unyielding even through pain. And then, slowly, he stepped back. His boots splashed against the threshold, retreating into the night's storm. He muttered curses under his breath, but his movements were halting, his glare broken. The gate creaked once more. Then silence. Only the storm remained. The mother sank to her knees, clutching the baby, sobs breaking free. The father dropped the crowbar, his body trembling as if every muscle had suddenly lost its strength. The dog swayed on his paws, breath coming shallow. Blood smeared the floor beneath him, both his own and the intruder. But his gaze drifted immediately to the baby. The cries were softer now, broken hiccups, the kind that followed fear. With staggering steps, the dog moved closer, lowering his head near the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers brushed his muzzle, gripping clumsily. And in that touch, something shifted. The cries slowed, the sobs softened. The parents watched, tears in their eyes, as peace seeped back into the room, fragile but real. The storm outside still raged, but inside, where the bond held strong, they had survived the break. The door banged shut, as the wind caught it, rattling the broken frame. Rain seeped through the crack where the lock had splintered, pooling slowly on the floorboards. The storm howled outside, relentless, as though mocking the fragile peace inside. The father pressed his back against the door, bracing it with his weight, chest heaving, as though he had run miles. His eyes darted around the room, shattered glass on the floor, overturned furniture, the trail of blood smeared where the dog had fought. The mother crouched on the rug, rocking the baby against her chest. His cries had softened into weak whimpers, his face flushed red from the strain of fear. She whispered his name again and again, her voice cracked. Between each breath she pressed frantic kisses to his damp cheeks, her tears mingling with his. And the dog stood swaying in the center of the chaos, chest rising and falling in ragged rhythm. His ribs ached from the intruder's boots, and blood dripped from the gash along his muzzle. Yet his eyes were fixed, only on the child. Every sound, every movement from the baby pulled him forward, step by halting step, until he was close enough to press his nose gently against the infant's tiny hand. The baby hiccuped, his small fingers curling instinctively into the dog's fur. The contact stilled him. His sobs melted into quiet breath. His eyes, still wet, blinked slowly, locking on the only constant he had known through the terror. A silence settled, not the silence of peace, but the silence that comes after something nearly breaks. The silence of people, realizing how close they had come to losing everything. The mother lifted her gaze, eyes brimming with gratitude and anguish all at once. "He saved us," she whispered hoarsely, her hand trembling as it reached out to stroke the dog's head. Her touch lingered on his ear, soft and reverent, as though she were touching something holy. The father swallowed hard, still bracing the door. He nodded, his jaw tight. "He's the reason we're alive." The dog didn't understand words, but he understood tone. He understood touch. And most of all, he understood the baby's grip on him. That grip was his anchor, his reason. Whatever storm came, whatever danger lingered outside, he would not falter. Yet the night wasn't finished testing them. The wind howled louder, rattling the damaged frame. The father pressed harder against the door. But the weakness in the lock was obvious. "This won't hold," he muttered. His voice was tight with fear he tried to mask. The mother's head snapped toward him. "What do we do?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked to the baby, then to the dog, bloodied, trembling, yet standing tall. Finally he said, "We need to leave. When the storm breaks, we can't stay here." The words hung heavy in the air. The home that had been their sanctuary, the nursery where the baby had laughed, the living room where the dog had stood guard, was no longer safe. The break had come, and with it the certainty that danger could find them again. The mother tightened her hold on the child, pressing her lips to his head. The baby stirred but didn't cry, his fingers still tangled in the dog's fur. The father knelt, meeting the dog's gaze. His hand trembled as it brushed against the animal's blood-matted fur. "You're hurt," he murmured, voice thick. "But we'll need you. He'll need you." The dog didn't flinch. His eyes were steady, unwavering. Even wounded, his purpose had not shifted. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the family huddled together, fear and love tangled like threads. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that their lifeline, fragile yet unbreakable, had carried them through the first break. And in the quiet moments before exhaustion pulled them into restless sleep, the baby's soft breath slowed against his mother's chest, and the dog lay close beside him, his body curved protectively around them both. His eyes never closed. Not fully, for he knew the storm was only the beginning. Dawn arrived reluctantly, dragging pale light through the storm-battered sky. The house smelled of damp wood and fear, the air heavy with the memory of shattered glass and blood. The baby stirred fitfully in his mother's arms, his face blotched from a night of crying, his small chest rising in shallow, uneven breaths. The father paced by the broken door, running his hand through his hair until it stood in frantic tug. "We can't stay," he said again, his voice low but urgent. He could come back, or someone else, and this storm. His eyes flicked to the swollen creek outside the window, water rushing faster than he'd ever seen. "If the power's out everywhere, we're cut." The mother pressed a kiss to the baby's head. "Where do we go?" she whispered. Her voice was thin, raw. The father hesitated. "North, toward the hills. If we can reach the old ranger station." "Maybe," he trailed off, shaking his head. "It's safer than here." The dog lifted his head from the floor where he had lain most of the night, ribs aching with every breath. His ears twitched at the sound of their voices, but his eyes sought only the babe. The infant whimpered, turning in his mother's arms, his tiny hand searching blindly until it brushed against fur. The dog pushed himself closer, ignoring the stab of pain in his side, and pressed his nose gently to that hand. The baby sighed, as though tethered back to calm. The father caught the movement, and his throat tightened. "He won't make it far. Not like this," he murmured. The mother looked at the dog, her eyes glistening. "He'll make it," she said firmly, though her voice cracked at the edges. "He has to." The dog didn't understand their words, but he understood the moment. He pushed himself onto unsteady paws, swaying before he found his balance. His tail didn't wag. His body trembled with fatigue, but his eyes held steady. The father gathered what little they could carry: blankets, a few bottles of water, a half-filled bag of baby supplies. He stuffed it all into a backpack, his movements hurried, desperate. "We leave as soon as the rain eases." When it finally did, they stepped into a world transformed. The storm had ripped branches from trees, scattered debris across the street, and turned the earth into sucking mud. Power lines sagged dangerously, sparking faintly where they touched the wet ground. The air smelled of ozone and soil, sharp and the mother clutched the baby against her chest, beneath a thick blanket, shielding him from the cold wind. The father took the lead, scanning the street with wary eyes, and the dog, though limping, trotted beside them, his gaze sweeping the shadows, every sense sharpened by purpose. The baby whimpered softly, stirring in the chill air. His hand reached out from beneath the blanket, fingers curling weakly. The dog pressed closer, brushing his fur against the baby's skin. The contact stilled the child's sobs into quiet. They moved slowly, every step through mud and debris a battle. The dog's body screamed with pain, each breath shallow, each rib aching where the boot had struck. But he did not fall back. He walked shoulder to shoulder with the stroller when they used it, and when the mud made the wheels useless, he pressed on beside the mother instead, never straying from the baby's side. Hours blurred. The sky remained gray, heavy with the promise of more rain. The father's shoulders slumped with exhaustion. The mother's arms ached from holding the child, and still the dog endured, his paws raw from the broken pavement, his wounds stiffening with every step. At one point, they paused by a fallen tree, its roots torn from the ground. The baby stirred, crying weakly. The dog limped forward, lowering himself until his muzzle brushed against the baby's tiny foot. The cries softened instantly, melting into small sighs. The parents exchanged a look, one of awe, of sorrow, of gratitude too heavy for words. The father knelt beside the dog, running a trembling hand through his fur. "You're carrying more than we are," he whispered, his voice cracked, almost breaking. "And you don't even know it." But the dog did know it, not in words, not in thought, but in the unshakable rhythm of his heart. Protect the child, always protect the child. And so they pushed on. The road north was hardly a road anymore. Churned mud swallowed their shoes, tree limbs crisscrossed the path, and every gust of wind carried the groan of structures not built to endure such storms. The world felt unfamiliar, stripped of its comfort and softened edges. The father led, his boots sinking with every step. He glanced back often, his eyes darting from the baby to the dog. The mother trudged close behind, her arms aching from the baby's weight. Yet she clutched him tighter, as though loosening her hold for even a moment would invite disaster. The dog limped beside them, his gait uneven but determined. His ribs ached with each breath, and the cut along his muzzle stung as rainwater seeped into it. Yet his ears remained pricked forward, his gaze sweeping constantly. Every broken window, every rustle in the trees drew his attention. The baby stirred beneath the blanket, letting out soft cries that carried in the damp air. The mother shifted him, humming softly, though her voice wavered with exhaustion. The baby's cries didn't ease until the dog pressed closer, brushing against the mother's leg, his muzzle nudging gently at the blanket. A tiny hand slipped out, grasping fur. The cries faded. Hours stretched thin. The cold gnawed at them, and hunger became a dull ache in their stomach. The father paused often to check his phone, though the screen remained dark with no signal. Each time he lowered it with heavier shoulders. By midday, they reached the flooded creek. What had once been a narrow ribbon of water now raged wide and furious, swollen with rain. The current whipped around uprooted branches and debris, carrying them downstream with brutal speed. The father cursed under his breath, scanning the banks. "We can't cross this." The mother clutched the baby tighter, her voice sharp with panic. "Then what? We can't go back." The baby whimpered, as though echoing her fear. The dog stepped forward, sniffing at the water's edge, his body tense. The sound of the rushing creek filled his ears, but louder still was the baby's cry. He turned, gaze locking on the child. His body shifted forward, as if to step into the current himself. "No," the father said quickly, grabbing his collar. His hand trembled against the wet fur. "Not you, not now." He swallowed hard, eyes darting back to the water. "There has to be another way." They followed the creek upstream, slipping over mud and rocks, their clothes heavy with damp. The baby cried again, high-pitched sobs that cut through the storm's aftermath. The mother's lullabies faltered. Her strength was waning. And yet, each time the baby's cries grew sharp, the dog pressed closer. His nose brushed the blanket, his flank pressed against the mother's leg, steadying her steps. The infant's tiny fingers reached for him, clutching patches of fur, and the cries softened once more. At last, they reached a section where the creek narrowed, still dangerous, but crossable with care. The father tested a fallen log that bridged the water, slick with moss and rain. It wobbled but held. "We'll go one at a time," he said, his voice tight. He took the bag first, arms outstretched for balance, every step precarious. When he reached the other side, he turned, his face pale but determined. "Your turn." The mother hesitated, the baby squirming in her arms. The water roared below, dark and violent. Her knees shook. The dog nudged her leg, pressing against her until she steadied. His eyes met hers, not human eyes, but eyes filled with something she understood nonetheless. "Trust me." She stepped forward. The log shifted, her breath caught, heart pounding as the baby whimpered. Step by step, she crossed, the log bowing under her weight. The dog moved beside her, paws slipping on the slick surface, but holding firm. Midway across, the baby cried, startled by the rush of water below. The mother faltered, her foot sliding. Her gasp echoed above the roar. The log tilted. The dog lunged, pressing against her shin, steadying her. His body bore the weight, his claws scraping for purchase. The mother regained her footing, clutching the baby tight. Together, they inched forward until the father's hands reached for them, pulling them onto the far bank. The dog followed last, limping but unshaken. His paws slapped against the wet wood, his body swaying dangerously. For one breathless moment, it seemed he might slip into the torrent. The baby let out a piercing cry, his hand flailing toward him. And as if pulled by that cry, the dog found his balance, leaping the final distance to the shore. He landed hard, his body trembling, but he stood tall. The baby's cries softened instantly, replaced by small hiccups. His hand reached out again, catching fur, clinging tight. The mother sobbed, pressing her face to the baby's head. The father knelt beside the dog, running a hand down his wet, bloodied fur. "You saved us again," he whispered, his voice breaking. The dog's tail twitched once, weak but resolute. His eyes turned toward the baby, and that was answer enough. They had crossed, but the journey was far from over. By late afternoon, the storm's fury had dulled to a heavy drizzle. The forest pressed in around them, its dripping branches creaking under the weight of water. Every sound carried, the snap of twigs beneath their boots, the baby's soft whimpers, the labored panting of the dog. The father's shoulders sagged beneath the weight of the backpack. His shirt clung to him, soaked through, his breath coming sharp and ragged. The mother stumbled more often now, her arms trembling from holding the baby for so many hours. Still, she refused to set him down. The baby cried weakly, his small face flushed with exhaustion. His tiny fists opened and closed, as though searching for something. The dog, limping heavily now, pressed himself closer to the blanket, his muzzle brushing the infant's hand whenever it reached outward. Each touch quieted the cries, though only for a moment. The father stopped suddenly, raising a hand. The forest had gone still. No birds, no rustling of small animals, only the patter of rain. His eyes narrowed, scanning the trees. "We're not alone," he whispered. The mother's breath caught. She clutched the baby tighter, her eyes darting into the shadow. The dog froze, ears pricked, muscles quivering despite the pain in his ribs. He sniffed the air, nostrils flaring. The scent was unfamiliar, sharp, metallic, dangerous. A growl rumbled low in his chest. The father urged them forward, faster now, his voice low but urgent. "Keep moving. Don't stop." Branches clawed at their clothes, mud sucked at their feet, but they pressed on. The baby whimpered louder, jolted by the sudden pace. His cries echoed faintly in the wet air. Behind them came a sound faint, but undeniable. The crunch of footsteps, deliberate and steady. The mother's eyes went wide. "It's him," she whispered. The father's jaw clenched. "Go, run." They pushed forward, stumbling over roots, slipping in the mud. The dog darted ahead, then circled back, limping but fierce, his growls vibrating through the trees. The baby's cries grew shriller, fueled by fear. The sound of pursuit grew closer. Branches snapped, heavy breaths cutting through the storm-muted air. The father turned sharply, leading them down a narrow deer path. The ground sloped steeply, slick with rain. "Careful," he hissed, though his own footing slipped. The mother tried to steady herself, but the blanket shifted, the baby squirming against her chest. She stumbled, catching herself against a tree. The baby wailed, startled. The dog barked furiously, darting back up the slope, his body a barrier between them and the approaching footstep. His snarl tore through the quiet, primal and unyielding. The intruder's shape appeared through the trees, broad, relentless, shadowed by rain. He moved with determination, his gaze fixed on the family. The father shouted, brandishing a fallen branch like a weapon. "Stay back." But the man kept coming. The dog lunged forward, ignoring the scream of pain from his ribs. His body collided with the intruder's legs, forcing him to stumble. The man cursed, swinging a heavy arm, knocking the dog sideways. He hit the ground with a yelp, mud splashing around him. "No!" the mother screamed, clutching the baby tighter. The father shouted for her to keep going, his voice breaking. He swung again with the branch, buying precious seconds. The mother hesitated, but only for a moment. She clutched the baby, stumbling down the slope, the dog dragging himself upright to follow. His paws slid in the mud, his body trembling, but his eyes never left the baby. Another crash behind them, the intruder and the father locked in desperate struggle. The sounds of grunts, curses, and breaking wood echoed through the trees. The mother pressed on, tears streaming down her face. The slope grew steeper, the mud slicker, her foot slipped, and she cried out as she fell hard onto her side. The baby screamed, though still wrapped in the blanket, unhurt. The dog rushed forward, despite his limp, nudging against her with frantic insistence. She clutched the baby to her chest and forced herself back up. Her ankle throbbed, her movements uneven. From behind, a shout tore through the forest. The father's voice, desperate, pained. "Go. Don't stop." The mother's sobs caught in her throat. She stumbled forward again, but the path narrowed into a crumbling ledge above a swollen ravine. The ground gave way beneath her foot, and with a scream she slipped. She clutched the baby tightly as she slid down the muddy slope, tumbling toward the ravine. The dog lunged after her, barking wild. At the last second, her body snagged against a root, stopping her just short of the rushing water below. The baby wailed in her arms, shaken but alive. The dog scrambled down beside her, his body slick with mud, pressing close as though to shield them from the world itself. Above, the father's shouts grew distant, swallowed by the forest. The intruder's heavy steps thundered closer. The mother's sobs broke free as she looked down at her child, then at the dog beside her. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Take him. If I can't keep him safe, take him." The dog pressed his muzzle against the baby's cheek, the infant's cries softening for a heartbeat. His gaze lifted, steady and fierce, and for the first time the mother believed he understood. The rain thickened again, falling in slanted sheets that blurred the trees into ghostly shape. The mother clung to the root with one arm. The baby pressed tight to her chest with the other. Mud slid away beneath her feet, every inch of ground threatening to crumble into the ravine below. Above, the father's voice rang out, hoarse, panicked, cut short by a grunt of pain. The sounds of struggle carried through the storm, fists colliding, branches snapping, the guttural curses of the intruder. "Hold on," the father shouted, though his voice cracked with strain. The mother's fingers bled from gripping the root. Her ankle throbbed, useless, her body shaking with exhaustion. She glanced down at the baby, whose cries came in ragged bursts. His small face was red, wet, terrified. Beside her the dog scrabbled against the mud, pressing himself against her hip as if to pin her in place, to stop her from sliding farther. His sides heaved with effort, every rib screaming with pain, but his focus never wavered. Another sound from above, the intruder's voice closer now. Heavy boots, sliding down the slope. The mother's eyes widened. She clutched the baby tighter, whispering desperately through tears, "Please, please forgive me." The ground beneath her gave way. With a scream, she slid down the slope, mud and stones cascading around her. The root snapped free, tumbling into the ravine with her. The baby shrieked. The dog lunged without hesitation. He clamped his jaws onto the edge of the blanket, halting the baby's slide just inches before the rushing water. His body strained, his paws digging into the mud, claws scraping desperately for purchase. The mother grabbed at branches, pulling herself upright, but the force of the slide had carried her several feet away. Her ankle twisted beneath her again, and she collapsed with a cry. The intruder's boots thudded down the slope behind them, relentless. The father's voice roared in the distance, furious, desperate. "Get away from them. The mother looked at the dog, her chest heaving. The baby dangled in his grip, his tiny hands clawing at the wet air, his cries sharp and terrified. Mud streaked his blanket, his face, his mother's trembling fingers as she reached for him. But the dog wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on the baby, steady, unflinching, as if the entire world had narrowed to that single heartbeat. The intruder was almost upon them. "Go," the mother cried, her voice breaking. "Take him, take him." It was madness, asking the animal to do what no human could expect. Yet in that moment, it felt right. The bond between them had always been deeper than words, deeper than reason. The dog growled low, tightening his grip on the blanket. Then he pulled, hard. The baby slid free from the edge of the ravine, landing safely against his chest. The infant's cries softened into hiccuping gasps. Soothed by the familiar warmth, the familiar scent, the intruder shouted, his shadow looming over them. The dog didn't wait. He turned sharply, clamping the baby's blanket tighter in his jaws, and bolted into the tree. His limp was heavy. His ribs ached with fire, but adrenaline carried him forward. His paws tore at the mud, his body weaving between roots and fallen branches. Behind him, the mother's scream split the storm. "Go! Run!" The intruder's curse followed, footsteps pounding after them. The baby whimpered, his face pressed into the dog's wet fur, his cries muffled now but steady. The dog adjusted his grip, careful not to jostle him too harshly. His body hunched protectively around the small bundle. Branches whipped against his sides. Rain stung his eyes, but he did not falter. Every sound of pursuit only drove him faster. Every cry from the baby only strengthened his resolve. The forest closed around them, a blur of mud and rain and shadows. The dog's breath came ragged, but his purpose was pure, unshakable. Protect him, keep him alive, whatever it takes. The storm swallowed the sounds behind them. The mother's voice, the father's struggle, the intruder's curses, all faded into the distance. It was just the dog and the baby now, alone. The forest swallowed them whole. Rain dripped from the canopy, each drop heavy, cold, relentless. The air smelled of earth torn open, of moss and mud and fear. The dog pressed forward, his body trembling with exhaustion, the baby's weight pulling at the blanket clenched in his jaws. The infant whimpered softly, his cries reduced to thin gasps after so much terror. His tiny fists flailed weakly, grasping at wet fur until they found purchase. His fingers tangled in the dog's coat, holding tight, as if instinct alone told him this was his lifeline. The dog slowed, adjusting his grip, careful not to jolt the fragile body he carried. Each step jarred his ribs, pain burning sharp through his side, but he ignored it. Pain was nothing compared to the small warmth pressed against him. He could feel the baby's breath against his neck, quick, shallow, alive. He paused beneath a cluster of bent trees, their branches woven low, forming a crude shelter. He set the baby down gently on a patch of moss, the blanket damp but protective. The infant whimpered once, his face scrunching as rain splashed across his cheek. Immediately, the dog curled around him, shielding him from the drops. The baby quieted. His fingers reached again, brushing against the dog's muzzle. Even without words, the gesture was clear. "Don't leave me." The dog licked the small hand once, a soft touch that tasted of salt and mud. Then he lay his head close, ears swiveling for danger. His body trembled with fatigue, but his eyes stayed sharp. The storm thinned to a drizzle, the forest dripping in its aftermath. Insects began to hum again, birds calling tentatively. The world was returning to life, but every sound made the dog's ears twitch, every rustle turning his gaze sharp. The baby stirred, letting out a soft, hungry cry, his face pressed against the blanket, rooting instinctively. The sound pierced the dog's chest. He whined softly, nuzzling at the infant's cheek, as if to say, "I hear you, I know." But there was no milk, no food, only love. The dog rose reluctantly, pacing a small circle, nose pressed to the ground. He sniffed, searching for water, for safety, for anything. His paws slipped in the mud, his limp heavier now. But when the baby cried again, he returned instantly, pressing close until the child quieted. As the hours passed, the forest grew darker. The sun was swallowed by clouds, leaving only a dim gray glow. The baby shifted in the blanket, his cries faint but steady, hunger gnawing at his small body. The dog licked his face again, his tongue sweeping away tears. Then, a sound, a rustle, heavier than birds or squirrels. The dog's head shot up, ears pricked, body stiff. He growled low, positioning himself in front of the baby. From the undergrowth came movement, slow, deliberate. A shadow shifted, and then another. Eyes gleamed faintly in the dim light. Wild dogs, lean and gaunt from the storm's havoc, their ribs visible beneath their matted The dog snarled, stepping forward, his body trembling but fierce. His muzzle bled, his ribs ached, but none of it mattered. Behind him the baby whimpered, small and helpless. The pack circled, hackles raised, teeth flashing. The dog lowered himself, ready to fight. Every instinct screamed at him to protect the life behind him, even if it meant his own end. The first wild dog lunged. The guardian met him head-on, his snarl tearing through the forest as their bodies collided. Teeth clashed, claws scraped, mud sprayed. Pain seared through his side again, but he drove forward, biting deep, forcing the attacker back. The baby screamed, his cries raw and frantic. The pack hesitated, circling wider. Watch. The guardian turned, blood dripping from his muzzle, and growled low, a sound that shook with pain but carried fire. His stance was unyielding. One by one, the wild dogs backed away, ears flattening, their hunger warring with caution. The snarls faded, their shadows slipping back into the undergrowth. Soon, only the rain and the baby's cries remained. The guardian staggered, collapsing briefly to his knees. His breath came ragged, his body slick with blood but when the baby cried again, he forced himself upright, limping back to curl around the small bundle. The infant quieted instantly, pressing his damp cheek into the dog's chest, clutching at his fur. The cries softened into hiccups, then into silence. The guardian closed his eyes for a moment, his body trembling, but his ears never stopped listening. He could not sleep, not while danger lingered. Above them, the storm clouds shifted, and for the first time in days, a thin sliver of moonlight broke through. It fell across the baby's face, pale and serene against the chaos of the world. The dog lowered his head, resting it gently against the infant's tiny hand. For now, just for this breath, this heartbeat, they were safe. Night came fast, as if the forest had swallowed the light whole. Shadows deepened into blackness, the trees looming like sentinels. The air grew colder, dampness seeping into every inch of earth. The baby whimpered in his blanket, his cries thin and reedy now, weakened by hunger. His lips puckered as he rooted instinctively, seeking something to fill the hollow ache in his belly. Each soft wail cut through the silence like glass. The dog curled tighter around him, his body forming a wall against the chill. His ribs ached with every breath, but he pressed closer, sharing what warmth he had left. When the infant's fists waved weakly, searching, the dog nudged them gently with his nose until they found his fur. Tiny fingers tangled in the wet coat, gripping with surprising strength for one so small. The cries softened, not because the hunger was gone, but because the child had found his lifeline again. The steady thrum of the dog's heartbeat beneath his cheek became a lullaby, anchoring him against the darkness. The guardian lifted his head, ears twitched. The forest was alive in the night. The croak of frogs, the rustle of rodents in the undergrowth, the distant crack of branches under heavier weight. Every sound tightened his muscles, every shadow set his hackles on edge. But the baby stirred, letting out another frail cry, and the dog turned back at once. He licked the child's damp cheek, whining softly. The sound wasn't meant as reassurance for the baby alone. It was a reminder to himself. Stay awake. Stay strong. He needs you. Hours crawled. The dog's eyes grew heavy, his body trembling from exhaustion. His wounds ached worse now, stiff and throbbing. Hunger gnawed at him too, but it was dull compared to the baby's fragile cries. Once, in the deepest part of the night, a branch snapped close by. The dog's head shot up, teeth bared, growl low and rumbling. Eyes glowed faintly in the dark. A fox, lean and starving from the storm's ruin. It froze at the sound of his snarl, ears twitching, then slunk back into the shadows. The baby stirred at the growl, whimpering. The dog immediately lowered himself, pressing his muzzle against the child's chest until he felt the tiny heart beating, fluttering, but steady. He licked his hand again, and the baby quieted. At last, the cries faded into shallow breath. The baby slept fitfully, his tiny body curled into the curve of the dog's chest. The guardian shifted slightly, careful not to disturb him, and rested his head across the child's legs. His eyes remained open, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Sleep tempted him, but he resisted. He could not sleep, not while the world was so sharp with danger. And yet, as the hours passed, his thoughts, if they could be called thoughts, drifted. He remembered the crib, the gentle routine of mornings filled with laughter and light. He remembered the baby's first giggle, the way his small hands reached with wonder. Those memories warmed him now, pulling him through the cold. The night stretched on. The storm clouds shifted, revealing a scatter of stars between ragged breaks. The forest seemed to breathe differently under that faint silver light. The baby stirred once more, whimpering softly, and the dog pressed closer, sharing every last ounce of warmth he could give. It was not enough to fill the baby's belly. It was not enough to heal wounds or erase feelings, but it was enough to hold the fragile line between despair and survival. Together, beneath the bruised sky, they endured. Dawn crept in slowly, gray light spilling across the dripping forest. The storm had passed, but its scars remained everywhere. Fallen trees, swollen streams, the silence of a world stripped bare. The baby stirred first, his cries thin and raspy, weakened from the long night. His tiny fists beat softly against the blanket, his mouth searching instinctively. Hunger gnawed at him, louder than any storm. The dog lifted his head, ears heavy, eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. His ribs burned, each breath shallow, but he pressed his muzzle against the infant's cheek. A soft whine slipped from him, low and desperate, a plea almost, as though he could will food into existence. The baby whimpered again, his cries breaking into hiccups. His small hand found the dog's fur, clutching with what little strength he had left. The guardian lowered his body, curling tighter around him, sharing warmth, though his own body trembled with cold. The forest was still, too still. The dog's ears pricked. A sound drifted through the silence, faint at first, then louder. Heavy steps. Not the intruder, not the father. These were padded, deliberate, primal. A low growl vibrated in the air, echoing through the trees. Wolves, the guardian rose shakily, his body stiff, every muscle quivering with fatigue. His lips curled back, teeth flashing. His stance was uneven, his limp heavy, but his eyes burned with fire. The baby wailed at the sudden tension, his cries shrill and frightened. The sound carried through the trees, drawing the wolves closer. Shadows shifted in the undergrowth, gray shapes circling. The dog snarled, stepping forward, positioning himself between the baby and the threat. His body was a wall, trembling, but unyielding. He barked once, loud, sharp, defiant. The wolves froze. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dawn light, their ears flat, their bodies low to the ground. Hunger gleamed in their gaze. The guardian's snarl deepened, his tail stiffened, his fur bristled. Every fiber of him screamed with pain. But love roared louder. He lunged forward, teeth snapping at the nearest shadow. The wolf yelped, retreating into the brush. The baby cried louder, tiny fists flailing. His cries were fear itself, raw and piercing. The guardian turned instantly, nuzzling him once before whipping back to face the danger. His growl filled the clearing, ragged but steady. The wolves circled wider now, testing, waiting for weakness. And weakness was everywhere, in his limp, in his heaving chest, in the blood drying across his muzzle. But still, he did not yield. Minutes stretched like hours. The wolves prowled, pacing, eyes never leaving him. The guardian held his ground, his body swaying, his breath shallow, but his stance unbroken. Behind him, the baby's cries faltered into whimpers, his hand reaching blindly, until it found fur again. That touch, that fragile, desperate touch, anchored him. The wolves drew closer. The guardian braced himself. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with purpose. If this is the end, I will not fall, until he is safe. A rustle broke through the standoff. Human voices, shouts, the crack of branches under hurried feet. The wolves froze, ears swiveling. A whistle pierced the air. Gunfire cracked once, sharp and loud. The pack scattered, shadows dissolving into the forest. The guardian staggered, his legs trembling, his body near collapse. But he turned instantly to the baby, pressing his nose against the child's cheek. The infant whimpered, then quieted, his small hand gripping tighter. Through the trees figures emerged, worn, muddy, frantic. The mother's cries split the morning air. "My babe!" The father crashed into view, his face streaked with mud and blood, his eyes wide with desperate hope. Behind him, two rescuers in ranger uniforms pushed forward, rifles in hand, scanning the trees. The mother fell to her knees, arms outstretched. The baby wailed once, reaching instinctively toward her. The guardian hesitated, his jaws still clenched on the edge of the blanket. Then, with trembling care, he lowered the bundle into her arms. The mother's sobs filled the clearing as she clutched her child. The father collapsed beside her, wrapping them both in his arms. Relief shook them, raw and overwhelming. And the dog sank slowly to the ground. His chest heaved, his eyes half-lidded. His body was broken, battered, bloodied, but his gaze remained fixed on the baby, alive and safe. Only then did he allow himself to close his eyes. The clearing was chaos and silence all at once. The baby's cries pierced the morning air, frantic and hungry, while the mother's sobs tangled with them, deeper, older, trembling with relief. The father knelt beside her, his body bent like a man who had carried too much for too long. His hands shook as they brushed over the infant's damp hair, as if he couldn't believe what his eyes saw. Alive. Their child was alive. The rangers moved cautiously, rifles lowered, but ready, scanning the tree line for any sign of the wolves. One of them spoke in clipped tones, but the words barely reached the family. The world had shrunk to this circle. The baby, the mother, the father, and the guardian lay just beyond them, his chest heaving in ragged rhythm. Mud caked his fur, blood darkened his muzzle, and his ribs rose sharp beneath the skin. His paws trembled with each shallow breath, yet his eyes never left the baby. The mother's gaze lifted at last. Through her tears she saw him lying there, broken but unbowed. A sob caught in her throat. No, oh no. She shifted the baby carefully into the father's arms, and crawled across the wet ground to the dog's side. Her hands hovered, afraid to hurt him, before finally pressing gently against his neck. His fur was damp, his heartbeat frantic but steady. "You saved him," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You saved all of us." The dog's ears twitched faintly at her voice. His eyes fluttered half shut, then opened again, dragging themselves back to the baby. The infant whimpered in the father's arms, and at the sound, the dog tried to rise. His body strained, his paws slipping against the mud, but he pushed anyway. Pain rippled through him, and he collapsed back down, a low whine escaping his throat. "No, no, stay down," the mother urged, her tears dripping onto his fur. Her hands stroked gently along his muzzle, brushing away blood and dirt. "It's all right. He's safe now. You did it." The father knelt beside her, the baby bundled against his chest. He looked at the dog, at the bruises, the wounds, the exhaustion etched into every line of his body, and his throat closed. "We wouldn't be here without him," he said hoarsely. He reached out, placing a trembling hand on the animal's head. The baby stirred, his cries softening into hiccuping gasps. His small hand slipped free from the blanket, reaching clumsily into the air. The dog shifted, straining forward despite his pain, until his muzzle brushed the tiny fingers. The touch was brief, fragile, but in that moment, the cries stopped. The baby sighed, his lips curving into something close to a smile, as if even in his young heart he recognized his protector. The clearing grew quiet. Even the forest seemed to still, as though acknowledging the bond that had carried them through the storm, through danger, through the edge of death itself. The mother pressed her forehead to the dog's, whispering through tears, "We'll get you help. I swear it. You're not leaving." The rangers moved closer then, their voices steady but urgent. One pointed to the dog, gesturing sharply. Supplies were pulled from packs, bandages, water, blankets. They worked quickly, hands practiced but gentle, wrapping wounds, checking breath. The dog flinched once at the touch, but he didn't resist. His eyes stayed fixed on the baby, watching as the child settled against the father's chest, safe, warm, alive. As the rangers lifted the dog onto a makeshift stretcher, the mother gripped his "Stay with us," she begged, her voice fierce through her tears. "Stay." The baby whimpered softly, and the dog's ears twitched. His gaze softened, his chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. For the first time since the storm began, his body surrendered to hands other than his own. The family rose together, mother, father, baby following close as the rescuers carried their guardian through the forest. Each step forward was heavy with exhaustion, but for the first time in days, the weight was shared. The bond that had saved them was unbreakable, and now they would carry him. The rangers moved quickly, weaving through the drenched forest with the stretcher balanced between them. The dog lay motionless atop it, his chest rising in uneven, shallow pull. Mud streaked his fur, blood seeped through the makeshift bandages, but his eyes remained half open, following only one thing, the baby. The mother walked close, cradling her child against her chest. The baby fussed, his cries tired and hoarse, but every time the dog's gaze met his, the wails softened. It was as if even in this broken state, the guardian's presence was still a balm. The father trailed close behind, his hand gripping the edge of the stretcher, refusing to let it out of reach. His face was pale, his jaw tight, as though holding himself together by sheer force. The forest path widened into a clearing where the rangers had set up a temporary outpost, a tented area with supplies scattered across tarps, radios crackling faintly. The storm had left their equipment battered, but it was enough. Here, one ranger barked, gesturing to a dry patch beneath the canvas. They lowered the stretcher carefully, easing the dog down. The mother knelt immediately, one hand still holding the baby, the other pressing gently to the animal's side. His fur was cold, his breath shallow. "He's slipping," she whispered, panic flooding her voice. The rangers worked fast, wrapping tighter bandages, cleaning wounds, checking his heartbeat. One muttered, "Tough dog, real tough, but he's lost a lot of blood." The words pierced her like glass. She looked down at him, tears streaking her cheek. "Don't you dare," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't you leave him after everything he's done for us." The baby stirred, squirming in her arms, his face scrunched, and he let out a soft cry. Instinctively, she leaned closer to the dog, lowering the child until his tiny hand brushed against the blood-matted fur. The baby's cries stopped almost instantly. His fingers curled, gripping weakly, his small body pressing toward the warmth. His lips parted in a soft coo, fragile, but full of recognition. The dog's ears twitched. His eyes fluttered open wider, cloudy with exhaustion but still searching. When his gaze found the baby's face, a low whine slipped from his throat. His paw twitched, as if he were trying to reach. The rangers froze for a moment, watching. The mother gasped softly, pressing her lips to the baby's head. "That's it. Stay with us. He needs you." The baby let out another small sound, not a cry this time, but a laugh, weak, bubbling, almost impossible, but it pierced through the weight of the clearing like sunlight. The dog's chest heaved, pulling in a deeper breath. His eyes stayed fixed on the baby's face, his tail twitching faintly against the tarp. The father dropped to his knees beside them, his hand trembling as it rested on the dog's paw. "Come back," he whispered hoarsely. "Come back to us, your family. We can't lose you." The rangers exchanged glances, softening. One murmured, "Sometimes it's not the medicine, sometimes it's the will." The mother lowered the baby closer, letting him rest against the dog's chest. Tiny fingers clutched fur again, gripping with surprising strength. The baby's head nestled into the warmth, his small body rising and falling with the dog's shallow breaths. For a long, fragile moment, nothing moved. The forest hummed in the distance, the storm's aftermath whispering in dripping leaves. Then, the dog exhaled sharply, his chest rising deeper, steadier. His body trembled once, then stilled, his breathing evening out. His eyes closed, not in surrender, but in rest. The baby sighed, his lips curling faintly, his tiny hand never letting go. Relief flooded the clearing. The mother sobbed openly, her forehead pressed to the dog's fur. The father's shoulders shook, his tears falling freely now. Even the rangers turned away briefly, their hardened faces softening in the glow of the bond before them. The guardian had not left. Against storm, intruder, wilderness, and even death, he had held the line, not through strength alone, but through love. The camp settled into a hushed rhythm, every sound softened as if in reverence. The rangers worked quietly, checking wounds, replacing damp bandages with clean ones, laying blankets over both the dog and the baby. Supplies clinked and rustled, but no one spoke above a whisper. The mother sat cross-legged beside the stretcher, the baby cradled in her lap, His eyes rimmed with red from so much crying, blinked slowly in the gray morning light. He was exhausted, yet whenever his gaze drifted, it seemed to circle back to the shape beside him, the guardian stretched across the tarp. The father busied himself with small frantic tasks, stoking a fire, checking supplies, pacing to the edge of the clearing and back again. His hands shook, his eyes rimmed red, but he could not stay still. Every time he glanced at the dog lying so still, his throat tightened with fear. The baby let out a soft cry, his body shifting restlessly. The mother soothed him, rocking gently, but when that failed, she lowered him back against the dog's chest. Instantly, the cries faded, tiny fingers tangled in fur, and the child released a long sigh, as if settling back into the only place that felt truly safe. The dog stirred faintly, a tremor rippling through his chest. His breathing was shallow but steady now, each rise and fall syncing with the baby's smaller breaths. The rhythm of two hearts, one fragile, one battered, beating in harmony. The mother brushed her hand through his fur, her voice trembling. "He's more than a protector," she whispered. He's part of him, part of us." One of the rangers, an older man with weathered lines across his face, nodded slowly. "Some bonds don't just happen," he said softly. "They're forged in fire. This one," his eyes lingered on the baby's tiny hand curled tight in fur. "This one's unbreakable." The father sank down at last, his exhaustion catching up with him. He leaned forward, resting his head in his hand. "He's saved us again and again," he said hoarsely, "and now we're here, helpless, watching him fight for breath." He lifted his eyes, filled with anguish. "It should have been me." The mother reached across, her free hand covering his. "It was you, and him, and me. We all fought, we all bled. But without him," she couldn't finish. Her voice cracked, tears spilling freely again. The dog shifted, as though stirred by their voices. His paw twitched, sliding across the tarp, until it brushed the baby's blanket. His claws caught faintly in the fabric, but he didn't pull away. The baby cooed at the touch, his lips curving in a weak smile. The mother gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. "Did you see that?" The father lifted his head, eyes wide. The baby giggled faintly, a sound so fragile it seemed almost impossible, after the horrors of the night. But it was real. The dog's paw remained, resting lightly against the blanket, as though anchoring them both. It was enough to remind them that hope had not slipped away. The day passed in fragments. The rangers secured the perimeter, prepared food, checked radio lines. For updates, the parents hovered, feeding the baby in turns, whispering reassurances, though he could not yet understand. And always, the dog remained near, sometimes stirring, sometimes still, but never letting the baby slip from his awareness. When the child whimpered, his ears twitched. When the infant's cries grew sharp, his breathing deepened, steadying the rhythm, until calm returned. By evening, the rain had faded to mist. A pale strip of sky broke through the clouds, streaked with soft gold. The family sat close together around the stretcher, their faces tired but softened by relief. The baby slept at last, nestled against the dog's side. The mother leaned her head against the father's shoulder, whispering, "We're going to be all right." The father wrapped his arm around her, his gaze fixed on the two sleeping forms beside them. "We already are." The forest hummed quietly around them. The danger had not vanished, but for the first time it felt far away. They were safe, for now and tomorrow. Tomorrow would bring healing. Morning sunlight spilled gently across the clearing, warm and golden after days of gray. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a world washed clean. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, of new beginnings hidden beneath the scars of destruction. The baby stirred first, blinking awake beneath the blanket, his lips puckered in a soft murmur, his tiny fist rising clumsily into the air. Instinctively, his hand sought out fur, and there it was, coarse, matted still from mud and blood, but warm and steady beneath his palm. The dog opened his eyes at the touch. For a moment, confusion flickered across his gaze, as though uncertain if this piece was real. Then he saw the baby's wide, innocent eyes staring back at him, and his chest rose in a deeper, calmer breath. The baby cooed, his lips curving into something close to a smile. He patted weakly at the dog's muzzle, tugging gently. The guardian didn't flinch. He leaned closer instead, pressing his nose against the child's hand with reverence. The mother, watching from nearby, felt her heart swell so fiercely it hurt. Tears filled her eyes. But this time they weren't from fear. They were from awe. Awe at what they had endured. Awe at the bond that had carried them through it. The father knelt beside them, his hand brushing the dog's head. "You brought him back to us," he whispered, voice thick with gratitude. "Now it's our turn to bring you back." The rangers had already packed up camp, preparing to guide the family to safety. They'd secured a vehicle farther down the forest road. Battered but run. Help waited beyond the trees, but no one rushed to leave just yet. This moment was too sacred, too hard-earned to break. The baby gurgled again, reaching out, and the dog shifted closer despite the stiffness in his limb. Their faces nearly touched. One so young, so new to the world. The other scarred and weary but unbroken. The forest around them felt different now. Not threatening, not suffocating. It seemed to breathe with them, carrying the soft sounds of life instead of danger. Birds called tentatively from the branches. Sunlight dappled the ground in shifting patterns. The mother lowered herself beside them, pressing a gentle kiss to her child's head. "Look at you," she whispered, brushing her fingers across the baby's hand still tangled in already stronger than we'll ever be. The father smiled faintly, his arms circling them both. Stronger because he never let go. His gaze softened on the dog. Neither of them did. For a while they simply stayed there. No words, no urgent, just the quiet communion of love and survival. When they finally rose to leave, the dog struggled to his paws. His legs shook, his limp pronounced, but he stood tall. The baby whimpered at the movement, his small hands reaching. The dog pressed close, brushing his muzzle against the child's cheek, and the cries faded into quiet coos. Step by step, they left the clearing. Step by step, they carried not just their bodies, but the weight of what they had endured, and the bond that had saved them all. The storm's scars lingered across the land. Fallen trees, broken homes, silence where once there was laughter. Yet within the family's small house, life slowly stitched itself back together. The baby grew stronger each day. His cheeks filled, his cries turned into bubbling laughter. His hands grasped eagerly at the world around him. And always, always, those hands sought the same thing first. The fur of his guardian. The dog's recovery was slow, but his wounds healed under careful care, his limp easing with each sunrise. He no longer bore the sharp edge of pain in every step, though the scars remained etched across his body. They were not marks of weakness, they were medals, silent testaments to the love that had carried him through. At night, the baby slept more soundly than ever, often with his hand still curled in fur through the crib's slats. The dog kept his place beside the bed, his breathing steady, his eyes soft but alert. When nightmare stirred the child, he pressed his nose close, releasing a low huff of comfort, and the cries melted away into sighs. The parents watched with awe that never dimmed. Every small act between them, a touch, a look, a shared breath, reminded them of the night that had nearly stolen everything. Gratitude colored every corner of their lives. They no longer saw a pet at their child's side, but a lifeline, a soul bound to theirs by something deeper than blood. One quiet evening, months after the storm, they gathered in the yard. The air was warm, the grass soft beneath their feet. The baby toddled clumsily across the lawn, arms outstretched for balance. Each time he stumbled, the dog was there, not too close, not too far, but perfectly placed to steady him. The baby squealed with laughter, tiny fingers gripping fur, pulling himself upright again. The mother sat on the porch steps, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Do you see?" she whispered to her husband. He nodded, his throat thick. "They're growing together. He's learning to walk, and he's learning to guard." The baby toddled forward again, this time falling softly into the dog's side.
Instead of crying, he laughed, a pure, unbroken sound. As the guardian lowered his head to nuzzle him gently, the father wrapped an arm around the mother. "He'll never be alone," he said softly. The sun dipped low, painting the world in gold. Shadows stretched long, but they no longer carried fear. The family sat together, bound by love, bound by survival, bound by the unspoken truth that they had all been carried back from the edge. The baby pressed his forehead against the dog's, eyes wide with innocent trust. The dog closed his eyes, his tail thumping once, slow and sure. In that simple moment, everything that mattered lived between them, past the storm, past the fear, past the breaking. They had found safety, they had found peace, and in the heart of it all, they had found each other. The yard was quiet, except for the rustle of evening wind in the trees. The world had rebuilt its rhythm, birds calling from the fence, crickets beginning their song, the air soft with the warmth, the fading sun. The baby stood on unsteady legs in the grass, arms stretched wide as though trying to catch the sky. His laughter rang clear, bubbling, fearless. Each time he tottered forward, each time his balance wavered, the same shadow moved with him, steady, patient, unyielding. His limp was still there, faint but permanent, a mark of battles fought and nearly lost. But it no longer slowed him. It was part of him now, like the scars that traced his muzzle, reminders of the night he had stood alone against darkness, against hunger, against death itself. The baby stumbled, pitching forward with a squeal. The dog moved instantly, sliding beneath his fall, steadying him with the weight of his body. The infant clutched at fur, eyes wide, and then laughter again, bright and pure, spilling across the yard like sunlight. From the porch, the parents watched in silence, their hands clasped together. They had seen terror, they had seen loss scrape its claws across the edge of their family, and they had seen this dog not just survive but save. Every laugh their child gave was his gift, every breath was his legacy. The mother whispered, "He'll never know just how much we owe him." The father shook his head softly. "I think he already does." In the yard, the baby pressed his forehead against the dog's, small lips puckering in a sloppy kiss. The guardian lowered himself, eyes closing, tail sweeping once across the grass. The child's hand stayed tangled in fur, the same way it had in the crib, in the storm, in the forest, on the stretcher. That hand had never let go, and neither had he. The world had broken against them, but the bond had held, not with words, not with promises, but with love, raw, wordless, unbreakable. A lifeline, woven in the silence of nights, tested in fire, stronger now than it had ever been. The sun dipped lower, draping them all in gold. Shadows stretched long, but they carried no fear. The family was whole. The baby was safe. And the dog had proven, beyond doubt, that love can be as fierce as any storm. As the last light of day kissed the horizon, the baby let out another laugh, tumbling once more into the dog's side. The guardian held steady, unflinching, his body a wall of devotion. And in that moment, the truth was clear. The storm had come. The break had torn them apart. The pursuit had tested them. The rescue had saved them. And now there was healing. And there was growth. But above all, there was love. A love that had carried a baby through danger. A love that had turned a dog into a hero. A love that would endure for a lifetime. The lifeline had held. And it always would.